Welcome back, scholars. Tonight we're talking about the Benjamin Franklin story concerning the savages of North America. Now, this piece is meant to serve as a sort of mirror to us. It's satire, and that's what satire does. It holds up a mirror to you and to a society or people, and it gets them to take a good hard look at themselves. And he does this quite brilliantly. Now, the reason we know this is satire, how we can tell it, there's this rather brilliant tip-off in the beginning. In the very first lines, he says, "Savages we call them because their manners differ from ours, which we think perfection of civility. They think the same of theirs." He begins with kind of a defense of the Indians, really, and their way of life, their society. We think we're the picture of civility. They think of themselves. Their society here is divided and divides labor equally, with equal weight given to their respective responsibilities and equal respect too. He says, the Indian men and young men are hunters and warriors, and when old men, they're scholars. Their government is the council of sages. There is no force. There are no prisons. There are no officers to compel obedience or inflict punishment. Hence, they generally study oratory, the best speaker having the most influence. The Indian women till the ground, dress the food, nurse and bring up the children, and preserve and hand down to posterity the memory of public transactions. These employments of men and women are accounted natural and honorable, having few artificial wants. They have an abundance of leisure time for improvement by conversation. Our laborious manner of life, which we value ourselves, they regard as frivolous and useless. An instance of this occurred in the Treaty of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, in the year 1744, in the government of the Six Nations. But he says, look, they have a perfect division of labor. They have very few things beyond, very few desires beyond what they absolutely need, and therefore they have a proclivity for improving communication, improving the way they converse and communicate with each other, which ultimately is the key to a better society. If you have doubts about that, look at our society today and look how polarized we are, the way that we seem to argue in the public sphere. He said they look at our way of life as somewhat frivolous and pointless. He said perhaps they have a better sense of what is really important in life and what they count as valuable. I learned in a literature and technology class in the master's program at my first graduate institution that the ancient Greeks had the capacity for creating a technological revolution. I mean, they had a very early version of an automaton, not a robot per se, but working gears and that sort of thing. But what they were more interested in was the science of getting along as a society. We would call that politics, without any irony. And so that's what they did. And this is very similar to the culture that he's describing here. The Native Americans have dedicated their lives to better communicating, a better understanding of one another. And there is a tradition he talks about where it is considered impolite to simply accept or agree to a proposition offered in public. The polite and honorable way to deal with that is to take a day and consider it. That way, the person who has made the offer, you know that you've given them due consideration, whether they accept it or reject it. They have given time and thought to it and considered all the options rather than just impulsively agreeing or disagreeing, which is the case that happened. Which is the case of what happened when they were made the offer to send their young men to white colleges and schools. He says, look, we'll educate them. We'll teach them our ways. We'll offer what we consider an improvement on their lives, on the way that their understanding of the world, and shine a light into the dark night of their ignorance. And so they considered it, and they said, "Listen, we really appreciate that, and we get the sense that you are trying to do things to our benefit. You're trying to do a good thing for us. But in the past, we've sent our young men to your schools, and they have come back as bad runners. They're out of shape. They had no forest skills, no knowledge of what it took to survive here in our way of life. They couldn't handle the cold or the heat. They couldn't build a shelter, couldn't build a cabin. They couldn't hunt. They couldn't kill an enemy. They couldn't speak the language flawlessly like they could before they left. And so basically they were good for nothing, neither good for counselors or for hunters. But I tell you what, we appreciate the politeness of your offer, and if you send your young men to study with us, we'll give you back men. And send your boys and your children, we'll give you back men. Native American society, there's a polite order to oratory that he talks about here. Each speaker is allowed to speak uninterrupted, and at the end he's given about 5 or 6 minutes to recall anything he left out, just in case. There's a certain respect in the sense that, okay, we want to make sure that we've heard everything he has to say, and he's gotten the chance to say everything he has to say. Only then does the other person speak, and they don't refute each other. They consider what the other person is saying is a truth, and therefore deserving of respect. This is contrasted, of course, to the British House of Commons, where the tradition is to just shout your opponent down, and you have to rush through your oratory. Otherwise, you're going to wind up, you're never going to get to finish your statement. Perhaps most telling, though, is the example of a Swedish minister who told them the story about the Garden of Eden and how it all began with the apple and the arrival of Christ. Christ had to come to sort the problem out and fix everything. And so their reply was very polite. They sat quietly and listened to his statements and listened to his oratory and the homily. And they said, "Thank you for telling us these good things. We appreciate that. We too have stories told to us by our mothers." And he goes on to tell them about how they discovered farming, what plants were good to eat, and how that they were given this knowledge by a sky woman who appeared from the clouds, and they shared the 2 warriors shared the deer that they had killed with her, and she, in appreciation for their kindness, said, "Go to this place here tomorrow and you will find plants." And there they found corn, and that changed their way of living. They were able to plant and harvest corn, store it up for the winter, and made their lives a lot more productive and healthy. The minister, however, gets angry and says, "Well, this is just myth. What I was telling you is the absolute truth, the gospel." Well, the problem being, to the Native Americans, the story they told was the gospel as well. It carried as much weight, as much holy and spiritual gravity as the story of Christ and the beginning of mankind. Hospitality, too. He says, "Look, we're just as curious about you as you are about us, but we don't want to stare at you. We want to look at you, but we don't want you to feel uncomfortable, so we hide in the bushes and observe you," which is only polite. Difference between, when white people come to our villages, and understanding that it's rude to just walk in without announcing yourselves, you hallow, that is, you yell and announce yourself. Then 2 old men from the tribe come, and they take you to a place in the village called the stranger's house. Right? Think of it as a hotel. Every village has one of these places, and you're told that you're taken there and you're fed and you're warmed, you're dried if you're wet, and you're given food and tobacco, and only then, after everything is done, then we have the conversation. Of course, typically, even to this day, we tend to, even with a business dinner, we tend to get right down to it. We want to discuss it. We want to say, let's get right to the meat of the subject here. When we say that, we don't mean the physical meat. We don't mean dining. We mean, let's get right on to talking about what we need to talk about here. This is seen as rude and polite. better to take care of your guest's physical needs first, and when he's warm and comforted, then he can concentrate on what he wants to talk to you about. Yeah. But perhaps the most damning, the biggest indictment of the tale is the Native American who had lived among the whites and dealt with the whites for a long time, and he was telling a comrade about what it was like. And he came in to see his client, a merchant for whom he sold beaver pelts to, and he says, what will you give me for beaver pelt? He says, I can't give you more than 4 shillings a pound, but I can't really discuss it now. I got to go to church. I've got to go to the meeting house where we go to learn good things. Well, this sounded good to the Native American. He goes, yes, I want to hear good things too. Well, let's see what it's all about. And so he walks into the building, but he gets the angry looks from the man in black, of course, the minister, who stares at him. What is this savage doing in here? Which is pretty counterintuitive to what a church should be, right? So he thinks, well, okay, I'll just go outside and wait until the meeting is over. So he built a fire and smoked his pipe and waited for his client to come back out. And when he returned, he said, hey, are you still going to give me Hans, I hope you've agreed to give me more than 4 shillings a pound. Right? But Hans says, no, I cannot give you so much. I can't give you more than 3 shillings and 6 pence. And then he spoke to several of the other merchants, and they said the same thing. He says, my suspicion was right. This place where white men go to learn good things, they are only in there to contrive the cheating of Indians on the price of beaver. So again, it's satire, but it's meant to communicate some truth to us. And what he is doing, he's looking at society. Now, Benjamin Franklin was one of the great wits of our time, as well as being something of a polymath. He had all manner of interests, including music, philosophy, invention, and so forth. But he also was very interested and engaged in the shaping of this new society, this new land, this new country. And the idea is to take a look at ourselves, take a really close look at ourselves and our behavior. And the best way to do that is to look at ourselves through someone else's eyes. Hence, he puts it in the voice of Native Americans. Okay, something to think about. Again, too, one of the things you'll see as you're studying American literature, especially from the earliest portions of our times of ourselves as a nation, is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Such is the case here. All right, well, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Certainly hope you enjoyed Benjamin Franklin. He was America's first rock star, and we have scarcely seen his equal. I'll see you in the next video.